Senior Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business for whatever time I shall consume.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, nearly 20 years ago, I was here in this exact spot. I remember it so well, deliberating the guilt and innocence of a president, and it happened at that time. It was President Clinton from your state of Arkansas. At that time, I said that I thought it would probably be the most important vote I'd cast as a United States Senator, but I was wrong, because I think my vote on Wednesday, the day after tomorrow, to acquit President Trump will be the most important vote of my career. I really believe that. Over the past few weeks, we've considered impeachment. There's been a lot made of the fact that I was willing to vote to convict President Clinton 20 years ago, and yet to vote the other way about in the current process that we're under right now. Now, putting morality question aside, this supposed debate highlights the central point of the differences in the impeachment process and why President Trump should not be impeached. And before Clinton was even impeached, he admitted to the crime of perjury. Now, this is a big difference, because we have a president right now who has not admitted that. In fact, there's not really been accusations that he would be in that position. And our debate then was about whether or not perjury was a high crime or misdemeanor. I believe it was. And as I said then, the president should be held to the highest standard. But that was substantially different than the question before us today. The question put to us by the House managers is an evidentiary one. It's one that asks the question if, according to the evidence presented, there is a determination that President Trump is guilty of a crime. And the answer is no. Presidents should be held to the highest standard, but that standard can't be a false moving standard that isn't based on evidence or is established by a court of public opinion. And here's why I will vote to acquit the president. The whole impeachment inquiry was initiated on the basis that President Trump orchestrated the quid pro quo with Ukrainian's president during a phone call on July the 25th of 2019. It's kind of confusing. A lot of people don't really understand what that's all about, but Ukraine has had serious problems. You know what's happened with the Russians have been there mass murdering the Ukrainians for a long period of time, and we've watched that happen. And so they kind of put this thing together saying, well, there was an arrangement made by the president, President Trump, that if they would withhold aid, and this would have been military aid to Ukraine, unless there was a deal they could make and have something stated by the president of Ukraine. Now, the House managers spent 75% of their time on this point and driving home the importance of our partnership with Ukraine and talking about the Russian aggression. Now, that was plain wrong, but worse, it's hypocritical, because there was nothing wrong with President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky. You might wonder how I can be so sure. Simple. The House Democrats' allegations were secondhand. And that means secondhand. They were hearsay. There was not one direct witness. In fact, they had 17 witnesses in the House of Representatives, and not one of them would make that assertion. Now, the transcript speaks for itself. No evidence of a quid pro quo, of any wrongdoing whatsoever, just as a president who understands both the importance of Ukraine as an ally and the importance of rooting out corruption. Now, President Zelensky said publicly that he felt no pressure, and he testified this, that Trump to investigate anything in exchange for foreign aid. Now, you got to keep in mind, we have a very conservative president. You know, he doesn't just dish out to everybody the foreign aid that they need. In this case, there was a necessity to have it. Military aid. We couldn't get any military aid from President Obama. All he wanted to send was blankets and K rations. Well, they don't have K rations anymore. They call them something else. But nonetheless, there was not going to be any military aid to them. And so the Trump administration placed a brief temporary hold on the aid to Ukraine to ensure that the American taxpayers were not going to be abused. Now, this is very significant. He did this to Ukraine, making sure that the amount of money that was sent in there is going to be used properly, and the amount of aid that military aid was going to be used. But at the same time, you got to keep in mind, he was doing that with everybody else too. He's just not a fast-spending president. He's going to make sure that things have to be made in accordance with the needs. In fact, in the other times, he withheld the same type of thing, financial aid to Afghanistan, South Korea, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Lebanon, and Pakistan. So the fact that he did with Ukraine was consistent with his other policies. This is what he does and what he's always done. I'm confident that this is because I talked to President Trump directly about it. See, I'm the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The committee is responsible for authorizing lethal aid to Ukraine, and I've been working on securing that lethal aid for a long period of time, dating back to 2014. 2014, we had a different president. It was President Obama. And then the Ukraine president, Poroshenko, I can remember being in Ukraine with Poroshenko and talking to him about this and why it was necessary. And this is at the same time that Russia was in Ukraine and was mass killing the Ukrainians. And so we went to President Obama to get help. And he wouldn't do it. He didn't want to send any kind of military aid and said, as he said over and over again, we talk about blankets and K rations. Well, when President Trump came into office, he changed it all. He's the first president to provide lethal aid to Ukraine. Lethal aid to Ukraine has been a committed partner in the region, helping them withstand Russian aggression. I bring this up because during the first 3 days of the House managers, about 75% of that time was spent on this issue, talking about his lack of support for Ukraine, when this president has been supporting Ukraine. And the House managers that were serving in the House at that time, this is significant. Of the House managers, 7 or 8 of them, however many that was, who have been sitting right over here for the last week, they were all talking about things they wanted to do for Ukraine, and yet the first vote that was taken was the Senate Armed Services Committee vote for 2016. And it happened to be that the Democrats, the very 3 Democrats that were serving at that time, voted against it. They didn't vote for it. And so this is the type of thing you get when this hate-motivated stuff was going on for such a long period of time. The House didn't prove Trump committed a crime. Now, I'm the first to admit, I'm not a lawyer. Sometimes I think that plays for my advantage. I look at things in a different way. I try to just inject a little bit of common sense. I listened to the lawyers, and frankly, some of them I didn't even understand what they're saying, but I do know pretty much what's going on around here. And in this case, the reasons behind why the president should not be impeached are common sense. He didn't commit a crime. And that came not just from me. You'd expect me to say that. That came from others that were the well-respected attorneys that were involved in each side of this case. In each of the past impeachment cases in the House of Representatives accused the president, Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton, of committing a crime. Now, this president didn't commit a crime, but Clinton did, and he admitted that he did. It was perjury at that time. That's a crime. Same thing was with Nixon, and the same thing was with Johnson. So all of those things that have happened in the recent history have been crimes, but not this president. The Democrats have wanted to impeach President Trump since before he took office. I think it was a witness that we had today. I believe it was today. They're talking about, and they had a kind of a visual up here that showed all of the people who have been trying to impeach President Trump ever since he took office. And I'm talking about the first week he was in office. And it was all documented up there. So they're still at it, and I have no doubt they'll continue to do that, but it's not going to work. It didn't work in this case. Democrats have wanted to impeach him since he took office. And the Washington Post reported the concerted effort by the left-wing advocacy groups to move toward impeachment of the president only minutes after his inauguration. So they've been looking and looking and looking for a reason to impeach President Trump. Now, I think that one of the stars of this testimony that went on was this Alan Dershowitz. He's one is held in the highest regard. He's a law professor at Harvard University, and he was a strong Democrat. He's not a Republican. And first thing he did was admit that he voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that qualifies him in a different way than most of the people who are here as witnesses. He was direct in his presentation and shredded the Democrats' case. He made it clear abuse of power should be a political weapon suited for a campaign, not impeachment, as abuse of power is not a crime or impeachable conduct. Dershowitz also explained that virtually every president since President Washington could have been accused of impeachment if they used the criteria that the House managers, the ones who were sitting over here, were using. They said that, and so that was just a level that could not be used, or it would have affected every other president had it been used at that time. He also had an important comment on whether or not we needed to hear sworn testimony from John Bolton. This is what he said. This is a quote by Dershowitz. He said, "Nothing in the Bolton revelations, even if true, would rise to the level of abuse of power or an impeachable offense," unquote. That's Alan Dershowitz. It's clear that the President Trump must be acquitted of the charges of the charge of abuse of power on its merits. A vote to convict in this case would be a dangerous precedent. So I would say time and time again, the House managers have preached at us that the truth matters, that the facts matter, that we must convict the president and remove him from office. In fact, the House managers' closing arguments, I tried to keep count of every time they made the accusations using the words cheat, obstruction, crimes, and so many times I never did get, I lost track. But truth matters, not just because you say the president has committed a crime, doesn't make it true. So here is what is true. This has been a partisan process from the start to finish. Compare that to the past. The impeachment inquiry against President Nixon was authorized by a vote of 410 to 4 in the United States Congress, an overwhelming bipartisan vote. The same thing was true in Clinton. They had 31 Democrats voted to impeach the president. Yet in the vote of the impeachment inquiry, the final vote to impeach the President Trump was strictly partisan. Not a single House member voted to impeach the president. On the contrary, every House Democrat did. No Republicans did. The House Democrats did. It's right down party lines. And I've listened to the facts and I've listened to the evidence, and I'm convinced President Trump has not committed a crime. All the legal minds that were in testimony pretty much agreed with that, including Dershowitz. I think, though, it has to be said, there's that hatred for Trump. We have to admit it. There's something about him a lot of people don't like, and yet it's his demeanor, it's his style. I understand that. But, you know, when you listen to the substance, you look at what he has done right now, rebuilding the military, including killing the top terrorists. You know, I'm particularly sensitive to this because this is in my committee that we watch him, what he has done to the military. Back during the Obama administration, using constant dollars, during the last 5 years of his 8-year tenure, he actually reduced the spending in military by 25%. I don't think that's ever been done in the history of this country, except maybe immediately following World War II. And yet, there he is rebuilding the military, and we're right now back where we are competitive now. I have to admit, though, that during those last 5 years of Obama, that we really hurt ourselves in terms of our relationships, in terms of China and Russia taking the leadership positions that they have taken. So he's been top in rebuilding the military, confirming constitutional judges. 187 judges in the last 3 years. That's a record that hasn't been done before. And oddly enough, these are judges who've actually read the Constitution. That's a novel idea. The best economy we've had in decades, I would say, last week we went through 3.5% unemployment. We used to consider 4% unemployment as being fully employed. And yet we have not been down to, I don't even have a memory as to when it's been down to 3.5%. The new trade deal that we did, that's new. It shows that we are getting things done. We have more Americans working today than ever before, and the median household income is the highest it's ever been. So we're going to have a vote, a very significant vote on Wednesday, and I think you know how I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote to acquit the president on both articles of impeachment, and that will be a very significant vote. With that, I'll yield the floor.